Welcome back, and to part 2 of our Blood Bowl box set painting guide for the Black Orcs. In part 1 we painted the Black Orcs themselves. This part we are going to paint the Goblins, and we're going to start off with the skin. We are going to go with a lighter skin color than what we used on the Black Orcs, so Vallejo Game Color Sick Green is a good starting point. To our sick green, we are going to add some Escorpina green, which is a very bright and light colored green. Add about 40% of that to the mix with our 60% sick green. For our next two layers, we are going to be adding pale yellow to our mix both times. For this layer, it's basically another highlight layer over the entire body of our goblin. And then for our final layer, it's just an extreme contrast, adding some extra detail to small areas like the knuckles, but especially in the face. He has such a cartoony face. I want to put a lot of emphasis on the large ears and nose. Decided to go back, add a little bit more of a darker green shade just here and there on the goblins. To be honest, there's not a whole lot of areas that need an extra amount of shade on these figures. So if you wanted to skip this step, you could, but there's a few little nooks and crannies where I wanted a little bit of a darker tone. With the ears and the big nose, it would be a shame not to do something a little bit more interesting with those. So we're going to give them a little bit of color using very thin layers of thinned down brown rose. We want this paint thinned, and we want to slowly build up the color so it blends seamlessly with the very light green we have underneath. And then we're going to add a little bit more emphasis to our brown rose by adding some glazes of gory red. We want this to be very, very thin, essentially just colored water, and no more than 2 glazes. A little bit around the cheeks, a little on the nose, and a little bit in the deep recesses of the ears. Now for the rest of the paint job, basically we're doing the exact same thing that we did in part 1, so I really don't want to repeat that all here. But there are some differences. Because we are working on tiny goblins and tiny little surface areas, we don't need as many layers, so we can actually skip a few. For example, with the red here in the previous video, we did a step mix of gory red mixed with vermilion before moving on to the vermilion. Because we're just painting a small chest piece here, we can just move straight on to the vermilion and then add the elf skin tone to that. Now for our purple with the kind of pseudo funky color shift paint effect, we have to do the same mixture pretty much as is because of the colors that we're adding here, going from purple to red to orange to yellow. Just want to note that again, this was kind of just experimental when I came up with it, and I do want to play around with it a little more. Really couldn't do it here because I have to have the armor match the Black Orcs, but on the head goblin, the one with the large helmet, I did go a little bit further with the orange and yellow highlights. Again, not too much, but I could definitely see this coming back in a future project where I can play around with this a little bit more, go a little bit more extreme with the contrast, or hopefully you'll beat me to it and try it on your own. Something else to note, to add a little bit more variety to the team, because I have duplicates of every single sculpt, I took this little goblin here who has a bracelet, and I used that bracelet because it kind of looked like the edge of a glove, so I painted one hand brown. So again, just to add a little bit more variety if you're not interested in doing any sculpting or converting. And then the final thing I want to mention is that whenever you're painting a unit, you want to keep your colors consistent, but when you have a team like this where they're all dressed differently, you do have to make for some accommodations for that. On this particular goblin, I already used a lot of browns on him because he's wearing a lot of clothing or leather, and I didn't want to do the shirt just brown as well. I only used 2 browns on every other miniature. So I decided to go a little bit lighter just to make him stand out a little bit more. And because we didn't go too extreme, basically we're in the lighter brown range using our beige and our heavy brown. So it doesn't stand out too much as if we were to use blue or something like that. But it is something I wanted to point out. Occasionally you do have to mix in another color when you're doing sort of a mismatched team like this one. And there we go. There is the second half of our Black Orc Blood Bowl team. As you can see, when we're painting smaller miniatures, we can actually get away with painting them a little bit quicker. You don't have to worry about scaling down every single technique that you used on a larger figure. We can skip a few layers because the surface areas are smaller, but in the case of these guys, because we have some larger areas of the miniature, namely the nose and the ears on a few of them, that allows us to add some extra detail there, details that we could not add to the Black Orcs. So that is it for this one. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure you check out the rest of my videos, subscribe, and all that stuff. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
47 Keebler elves were killed today when a light plane plunged into their tree.
EL Fudge remains in critical condition.